But I have a two-part question for you. Do you get the sense that the luster has sort of like worn off of Sean McVay at all? And if it hasn't, is there a lot of faith that he will be able to get the most out of Matthew Stafford? And if it has, is there skepticism with what he'll be able to do with that new quarterback?
I don't necessarily think there's skepticism of what he's going to do with Stafford. I think a lot of fans and analysts expect him to have a really good year with Stafford, with a quarterback who has seen every defense, who's played in all kinds of offenses, who knows how to make the right reads, and is not necessarily the most mobile quarterback, but he can win off platform and out of the pocket and things like that. Whereas Jared Goff was kind of a slow processor, didn't always make the right reads, didn't see blitzes when they were coming. And when the play did break down, he was honestly one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. He didn't have the freelancing ability that I think a Matthew Stafford will have. So I think in that regard, Sean McVay is going to look better with the way that he's calling games. And I don't know how much you watched the Rams last year, but it was very conservative and kind of boring offense, a lot of checkdowns, a lot of short passes, and just letting Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp get yards after the catch. And you can only do that for so long. And McVay said it this offseason. He said, if you're going 10, 12 plays down the field every time, your margin for error is so slim. You have to have these explosive plays to take advantage of. And they just didn't do that. So I don't necessarily think there's any skepticism of what he's going to do with Stafford, but some fans have grown a little tired of his conservative calls and screens on third down and runs on third and long and things like that. But I think that's going to change with Stafford coming in, being a more aggressive and strong-armed quarterback.
So talk me into Matt Stafford being different than he's always been. Okay, so yes, you have the weapons, but we've seen Matt Stafford with weapons, and he's had some great games against the Vikings. And so again, I'm not saying that Matt Stafford can't play football, and he's made some of the most ridiculous throws against the Vikings I've ever seen. I mean, there are some times where he's, off the back of his foot, it's 30 yards, rocket down the field. The other thing I've seen though is him get sacked 10 times in a single game by the Minnesota Vikings. Last year, they had a chance to beat the Vikings, and he throws, 2 red zone interceptions, was it, Sam? Or at least one to Eric Kendricks that was in the end zone. Yeah. And it's just this sort of, like with him, a home run hitter that when he's hot, he's really hitting him out of the ballpark. But then when he's not, I think this is the reason he ends up around 500 a lot when his teams are even good, is because he has a lot of these sort of peaks and valleys. And the other thing too, everyone praises the ever-loving hell out of Matt Stafford for being tough. And I don't doubt that he's tough, but he's also injured all the time. And this has to be another thing that as you run through the scenarios in your head, what can the Rams be, that this sort of comes up. So those are my criticisms, which I'm sure you'll agree as a journalist are reasonable, but talk me out of them. Like talk me into Matt Stafford is going to be different in LA than he has been in a decade in Detroit.
So the injury thing is definitely something that you have to take into account. He this offseason, he rattled off the injuries that he played through, which a lot of people didn't even realize. I think it was with the Detroit Free Press in an interview, and it was like his thumb, his shoulder, his ankle. It was so many different injuries that you couldn't even imagine. And he played the season through them, but when you're playing hurt, you're not playing 100%. You're not at your peak. You're limited a little bit. And I think he's healthy now. He had thumb surgery. It was just a minor cleanup type thing. He says he's healthy. But as far as his style of play on the field, I think the fact that he's going to have McVay, whose offense is really predicated on making these easy reads, open receivers, a lot of great route combinations that get guys open really easily. So Stafford's not going to necessarily have to try to fit these tight window throws constantly. And Next Gen Stats has Jared Goff as like one of the least aggressive quarterbacks throwing into tight windows, and because he didn't really have to, and he still had decent numbers. And I know he had some boneheaded interceptions that cost them, but it wasn't necessarily because he was trying to fit these difficult throws into tight windows. They were just stupid throws that he shouldn't be making. So I think with McVay coaching Stafford, obviously he's going to have a completely different offensive system than what Stafford has been in before. And he's talked about the learning curve and how he has to get up to speed and things like that. And I think this offense is going to fit him well. It's going to include some deep shots, but it's also going to include a lot of crossers and routes that fit his eye well. And he's going to have a lot of open receivers.